We are dedicated. Ooh, sorry about that. We are dedicated to expanding statewide clean and fuel neutral infrastructure that supports our state's environmental and economic vitality. We also partner with cross-sector transportation industry organizations and advocate to promote and implement sustainable energy practices. I want to thank my amazing team, specifically Jacob, Lexi, and Tim, for their tireless efforts in putting together this webinar. We're excited about this funding opportunity and what it could mean for Ohio communities. This will be the first of two webinars. The next one will be on April 26th. Our hope is to provide an in-depth look at eligibility, partnership possibilities, and how Clean Fuels Ohio can be a resource to you. Thank you again for sharing an hour of your time with us, and we hope that you enjoy what we're about to present. So I will turn this over to the team.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This is Tim with Clean Fuels Ohio. I think Jacob has started to share the screen. So I will let Jacob go ahead and start with introductions.
Sure. So as Christy mentioned, we are Clean Fuels Ohio. For those of us who might not have heard of us or worked with us in the past, our mission is very broadly to improve air quality and health, reduce environmental pollution, strengthen Ohio's economy, and enhance our nation's energy security with a specific focus on the transportation sector. So our notice slides weren't advancing. Sorry about that. So our vision is to deploy inherently cleaner technologies and fuels that replace gasoline and diesel, especially older diesel engines, promote efficient and affordable mobility, promote cleaner, healthier air for all communities, develop a sustainable climate today and for generations to come, welcome innovation and technological advancement with good paying jobs, and develop a bright, prosperous, and cleaner future for our children. We are the state's leader in integrating cleaner transportation solutions and helping to connect public and private partners and develop projects in the state. And then, so I am actually Jacob Schwemlein. I'm the director for Drive Electric Ohio, our EV focused wing. And our priorities are consumer grassroots education, engaging with local, state, and federal policymakers, with utilities, co-ops, and regulator engagement, working with EV dealers and manufacturers, and promoting equity and access for these projects. So making sure that all communities throughout Ohio are involved and benefit from these technological advances. And so, my cameras. Our agenda today is the first, well, we are already in part two, but just a welcome and introduction, a brief history of Clean Fuels Ohio. The next session will be the review of the CFI grant itself, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant. And then a discussion of how CFO can help develop your project, with kind of a specific focus on how we can either work on the grant writing side to help develop a better, stronger grant application, or just help connect you with vendors and potential partners in your area. And then we'll also have a survey towards the end, just to make sure that for everybody who is attending, we know kind of what stage of the project you might be at. So and identify how we can help you advance. Slides aren't moving. I'm sorry, could somebody put in the chat which slide y'all see?
Hey, Jacob, it looks like it's not on presenter mode. So I wonder if you're able to switch to presenter mode, it'll allow you to, one, get it full screen for each individual slide, but then also move on to the next slide.
Sorry about that. Technological difficulties are always fun. Right. I will
And
stop
yes,
share and restart the share.
and the slides will be available and circulated to all the attendees here. So if there's any information that you guys miss, we will be sharing it after.
All right, so y'all should see the agenda slide, and then did you see it advance?
Perfect. I think we're good here now.
Okay, awesome. And then back to the agenda real briefly. At the end, we are going to have a questions and answers section. So open discussion to review this funding opportunity and figure out some of the next steps for everybody. And so just so we are all on the same page, this is one component of a variety of federal funding opportunities that have been announced or are going to be announced in the coming future. Specifically, this is the $2.5 billion in community development grants for our alternative fuel infrastructure. So this is separate from the NEVI funding, that's the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funding that ODOT announced an RFP for last October. And all right, we can begin the CFI funding opportunity review. Tim, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Timothy Cho, Senior Manager of Federal Grants and Special Projects here at Clean Fuels Ohio. Just a little quick background about myself. I joined Clean Fuels Ohio in the summer of 2018, right after from graduating the Ohio State University. So been at CFO for a little over 4.5 years now, and just been through a lot of different cycles with the organization, but nonetheless have kind of seen just such exciting times within the past couple of months, and surely within the past year, after the COVID-19 pandemic kind of struck the whole world. But it seems like for the space of transportation, electrification, and alternative fuel infrastructure deployment, we're in such exciting times, and the growth and the movement that we're seeing from federal funding to cool deployment projects happening not just in urban areas and communities, but also in rural and disadvantaged areas as well, has kind of allowed all of us in this space to come together again and form new partnerships, reestablish partnerships in the past. And I think with this specific funding opportunity that we're gonna kind of dive into today, is just one example of kind of this new wave of partnerships that will be formed to not just deploy technologies for both communities and for corridors and just the whole transportation landscape, but to unite Ohio as a state and to make sure that we're really making strides to make sure that transportation and mobility is advanced, and that in the future we can remove emissions from the environment and to accomplish these goals that we've set ourselves to accomplish. So just wanted to start with that opening remark. And Jacob, if you could move on to the next slide. I want to start off this CFI program overview with something that the US DOE, the EPA, the DOT, and the Housing and Urban Development Office also combined recently back in January. And what they essentially did was create this interagency framework to develop strategies and actions to remove all emissions by the transportation sector by the year 2050. And so the four agencies essentially released the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. And something that I wanted to start off with this overview is just reminding folks that the transportation sector, which not just includes the cars that are on the road, but does include air travel, sea travel, that anything that allows people and goods to move, still account for a third of all domestic greenhouse gas emissions, which at the end of the day still affect and impact the health and the well-beings for millions of Americans, and for the many of the residents and the citizens and people, including yourselves and myself and my team here in Ohio. And so transportation costs still are the second largest annual household expense in our country. And so for a lot of Americans, this is still a financial burden to be able to afford cost-friendly transportation modes, but also finding a way to utilize not just some of the existing modes of transportation that are still around today. And so with this new kind of interagency framework, this is kind of framing out, what the federal government wants to accomplish with all these programs and through the bipartisan infrastructure law and everything else that we're seeing from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And so some of the key pillars that the federal government is really emphasizing here is transportation that is convenient, efficient, and clean. And so what are ways that we can continue to improve community design, land use planning to make sure that residents and citizens are getting the most convenient modes of transportation, and then efficiency as well, just to make sure that whatever modes of transportation we're using, whether it be your transit buses, your taxi cabs, Uber and Lyft, transportation network companies, or even your bicycles, are these modes of transportation being integrated into our current infrastructure in ways that will be seamless and efficient, or are they just adding another hoop and hurdle for folks to understand how to best use these modes of transportation? And then the last pillar is clean. So just to make sure that every piece of technology that we're putting out there on the road, on the sea, in the air, is continuing to help us accomplish our emissions goals, and everything that we're putting out there isn't spewing greenhouse gas emissions or pollutants into our air, and affecting specifically the communities in disadvantaged areas and even rural areas and places that might not be on our radar that we've even thought of yet. So just wanted to start off with this slide to kind of set this framework of how important some of these issues are today and how we plan to address them, specifically from the federal government and their guidance. But kind of diving deep now into the CFI program, I'm sure a lot of you have already taken a look at the NOFO and have sat in on a couple of webinars by the DOT and the FHWA, and they do plan to have a couple more webinars during this month of April. So we do anticipate to sit on those, and surely all of you plan to be on those as well. But just to remind folks who have not had a chance to review the CFI program, it's essentially this newly announced program by the Biden-Harris administration that is investing $2.5 million over the next 5 years in sustainable charging and fueling infrastructure for two specific categories. So they are the community programs, which include your typical communities within cities, municipalities, school districts, parking areas, business areas, commercial areas, anything that really serves to fit the communities. And then there's the corridor program, which strictly strives to deploy charging infrastructure and fueling infrastructure along interstates and their exits. If you've been familiar with the Federal Highway Association Administration and some of their alternative fuel corridor work, they do have guidelines on what kind of serves as charging infrastructure under designated corridors. And for EV charging, it's typically a mile or under from interstate exits, and also 5 miles or under for other alternative fuel infrastructure, such as like natural gas or propane. But this program that has been recently announced isn't just making an investment in EV charging. As Clean Fuels Ohio, we're fuel neutral, and we have a lot of guidance and resources from the DOE to make sure that other alternative fuel types are still being still sought after and still get the attention that they deserve. So I want to remind folks that this program also seeks to deploy hydrogen, propane, and natural gas infrastructure as well, and specifically to serve those fleets that still use those fuels. So yeah, with the next slide, we'll dive a little bit more deeply onto what the award size looks like for each of the different program grants. And so specifically for this fiscal year, 2022 and 2023 for this cycle, the minimum anticipated award that the DOT plans to give for anyone who applies for the community grant will be at a minimum of $500,000. And then on the very upper end of that scale, $15 million for the most maximum award, really just depending on how you plan to budget your projects and how much infrastructure and construction costs and technology costs each of the programs will seek to deploy. And so on that same note, for the corridor grants, there's also that same amount of minimum and maximum funding for this fiscal year cycle. And so that puts this current cycle at a total of $700 million total for this round, which is a lot of money. And if you were to divide it out into like a ballpark number of projects that the DOT could probably award, it will probably fall under the range of like 15 to 20 within both of the community programs and the corridor program grants. And so, overall, if we're looking at the 5-year length of the CFI program, both of these community and corridor programs will get around $1.25 billion to deploy charging and fueling infrastructure. And it does, like, there is a typo, so one does say community and the other one should say corridor on the bullet points in the slide that's currently being shown. But it seems like the funding award size is the same for both the community and the corridor program for at least this first year of the program. Next slide, Jacob. So this slide will address some of the cost share items regarding the CFI program. And so the federal share of the cost of a project carried out with the CFI program funds under both programs shall not exceed 80% of the total project cost. Cost sharing or matching is required with the maximum federal share being 80% of the total cost of the project. And so for a lot of you here today that might be looking to submit an application or already starting to talk with partners to gear up an application, be mindful that awardees and for those that do submit an application and do get an award to proceed with their projects must provide at least 20% of the total project cost as matching share. And so that is not federal share, that is matching share that the project has to cite and document upfront and find a way to work with their specific private entities to find a way to document that. And so something that I also want to prioritize here for folks that are looking to deploy a project specifically for the corridor program, be very mindful that eligible entities that contract with a private entity. So when we use the term private entity under the CFI program, that typically means a corporation, a partnership, a company, or a nonprofit. In most cases, anyone who will really be helping deploy some of this infrastructure and the hardware. The CFI program is saying that the partnership and whoever is applying for these applications must include in their contracts a condition that the private entity shall be responsible for the share of the project costs carried out with the CFI program funds not paid by the federal government. And so they have further clarification around that online under the FHWA guidance on non-federal matching requirements as well. So just wanted to touch on that for folks, but there is further information online and in the NOFO. So next slide, please. So it looks like a lot of you have already reached out to us in terms of exploring, hey, can we apply for this grant? Would we fall under the list of eligible applicants? So I just wanted to remind folks on who is considered an eligible applicant under the CFI program. And so a lot of the private entities that have reached out to us have been saying, hey, it doesn't look like we're listed under this list of eligible applicants. Can we still find a way to participate? And the answer is yes. You just have to find someone who fits under one of these categories for applicants and find a way to pitch yourselves and to be a provider of that technical service or charging infrastructure or hardware that's going to be deployed for each of the projects that you're interested in working on and applying for. So certainly we like Clean Ohio, we're a nonprofit, so we don't actually fit in this list of eligible applicants, but we have a lot of cities and townships and some of these MPOs and Council of Governments that have reached out to us already. So these are the ones that would have to start priming up an application. But we're in a position where we supported grants in the past, in the 10+ years that we've been kind of experts in this. And so feel free to reach out to us if there's a program or project that you're looking to, gear up and want to, submit an application for. We're always happy to kind of share some of the projects we've worked on in the past, have been awarded, and can even share some of the scope and general budgeting that we've laid out for project costs. But I think that just depends on each of the projects that you're looking to do in your part of the state, specifically in Ohio. And we're open to those conversations, but this is a list of eligible applicants that has to be the one submitting an application to the grants.gov website. Next slide, Jacob. And so real quick here, I'm going to kind of go over the community program and some of the eligible projects that the DOT is looking for and some of the eligible project costs. And so all this language that you see here on the slide is pretty much taken from the NOFO, but it's just a synthesized and summarized version of the language on that document. And so for the community program, as I've mentioned, $15 million in minimum and 500,000 maximum for each award. These projects will really focus on infrastructure that is publicly going to provide charging and fueling infrastructure. So some of those projects may look like charging infrastructure and fueling infrastructure located in parking facilities at public buildings, public schools, public parks. In Ohio, we have our Ohio Metro Park system and the Department of Natural Resources that we've been talking with on a couple of projects that have been successfully deployed, not with this program, but in projects that we've done in the past. So they're a potential partner that would want to deploy maybe EV charging at some of their parks and some of their parking areas where they know that a lot of Ohio residents will visit and utilize these parking services for charging. And so at the end of the day, the community program really focuses on charging and fueling infrastructure that will be publicly accessible, not just to fleets, but for anyone, any motorist out there that uses that specific fuel type. And for eligible project costs under the community program, the key things that you can take away with you here today is that the costs for any community program grant or application will include acquisition and installation of infrastructure, as which we've already mentioned, but also any related construction or reconstruction, or even the acquisition of real property directly related to the project. And then even maybe some of the technical scope of services as well, maybe even like feasibility analysis, EV charging planning, feasibility studies, revenue forecasting, preliminary engineering and design work, and also other pre-construction activities. So it doesn't necessarily have to include just acquisition of hardware and acquisition of property, but it can include some of these pre-development sites planning services as well, so that if there is some time that the project needs to include maybe that first year to do some work and do some planning, the program is going to allow for that to happen. So I think that's something that a lot of folks can think about more when they're kind of forming their project teams. And if there's a firm that you've worked with in the past, or if you've worked with us in the past, we certainly do provide some of those services and can kind of line that in for maybe the first year of the project. And with the second year and the third year focusing on deployment and a lot of dissemination work, typically how these federal deployment projects work. Next slide, Jacob, to the corridor program. So the corridor program under CFI will support build out of, again, charging and alternative fuel infrastructure, but more specifically along designated alternative fuel corridors. If folks here are not familiar with the alternative fuel corridors, the Federal Highway Administration every year works with their designated corridor assigned groups. Typically, that's the state DOTs or the metropolitan planning organizations across different regions of the state. Whoever is that assigned entity, every year they look to make each interstate corridor in their state corridor ready or corridor pending. And so a lot of these corridors that are corridor ready already have a lot of fueling infrastructure along these highways. And that's a good kind of standard that we look at to make sure that any project through the CFI program that wants to deploy new infrastructure, they can kind of see what charging infrastructure is already deployed to date. They can talk with these organizations to see which corridors are pending and which which ones need a couple of more CNG stations or EV charging infrastructure along I-80, you know, I-75, I-71, and maybe some of the even smaller ones as well. And so as long as the charging infrastructure and the fueling infrastructure directly related under the corridor program serves to the charging or fueling of a vehicle, which in this case can fall under fleet, private fleet, individual motorists, just making sure that fueling infrastructure is of use to any vehicle traveling along the corridors. And as I mentioned earlier, there are specific guidelines for how far charging and fueling infrastructure locations should be from the interstate exits or highway intersections as well. And under eligible project costs for the corridor program, applications must contract with a private entity for acquisition and installation of eligible infrastructure, because most of the times with corridor infrastructure, you're going to have to start fueling for a lot of different EVs or CNG trucks or whoever is fueling at these sites. And so it's going to be a lot of capacity to fuel a lot of these vehicles that are going to be stopping by and getting their brakes and needing to fuel up even more. So I think for the charging side of things, there's going to be a lot more planning involved with the kind of load and the transformers and the electrical capacity that you'll have to integrate into that site, and how many parking sites that you'd want to consider along specific corridors. And certainly there's a lot of examples and case studies of what you could kind of mirror and kind of replicate, but that's just something important to know what the DOT is looking for. And something else is that the private entity that you're working with must provide operating assistance for the first 5 years of operations after the installation of eligible infrastructure. So that way the facility can transition into independent system operation. So I think that's just a way to make sure that the DOT and the program can make sure that there is kind of this hand-holding process so that the private entity does show and they don't just drop the technology and the hardware and the fueling infrastructure and just leave. And that way kind of makes sure that the maintenance issues and utilization issues are also being considered as well during the first 5 years. And I will move on to the next slide. So when you're writing your application for the CFI program, it's important to know what documents are required for your applications, but also some of the merit criteria that the DOT is looking for. And so the key documents that each application must will include a project narrative, budget information, merit criteria, which is the second column of this slide, but also project readiness and environmental risk. So there's specific language on the NOFO that clarifies how you should frame each of the requirements listed here. But something that I want to focus on specifically is the project merit criteria. So specifically safety, climate change, resilience, and sustainability, equity, community engagement, and Justice 40 initiative items, workforce development, job quality and wealth creation, and the CFI program vision. And so I think it's important when you're writing your application, you bring on folks who know how to specifically target meeting these criteria for your application. And as a US DOE designated Clean Cities Coalition, Clean Fuels Ohio definitely has a lot of expertise and knowledge and insight on how to frame specifically the merit criteria 2, 3, and 4, just with the work that we have done in the past and in economically and racially disadvantaged communities within our state and within our region, but also issues around climate change and resilience and some of the private foundation work that we've done and continue to do. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here that focuses on some of the focus area categories. And so these are just some examples that the CFI program will be looking to kind of see in your application, projects that serve these specific applications. So listed here, we have different multimodal hubs and shared use fleets and services. So anything that really seeks to connect or promote rental vehicles, taxis, car sharing, ride hailing, micromobility, even microtransit, but other kind of electrified or alternative fuel, multi-passenger, active mobility solutions. And then just another example, rural area charging and fueling stations. So any project that supports multi-purpose use, including single occupancy vehicles, medium duty vehicles and fleets, all within a rural setting and rural communities, and finding a way to present solutions in a new way of kind of tackling some of the challenges and opportunities that transportation can provide in these communities will be something that I think the DOT will not take lightly, just because with some of the work that we've been doing with universities like Tennessee Tech University, West Virginia University, and even Transportation Energy Partners, there's a big focus from the DOE on rural areas and some of the ways that we can continue to do ride-and drives and deploy charging infrastructure and other fueling infrastructure in these rural areas as well. So just wanted to touch on that, on the community program. And then the corridor program, won't spend too much time here, but anything that really serves to demonstrate the build out of alternative fuel corridors, specifically zero emission corridors for medium and heavy duty vehicles as well, and applications that fall under freight and logistics, goods parcel movements, and some of the projects that you see in that specific application. We'll move on to the next slide. And then let's see, the last slide here on my speaking portion really seeks to allow all of you on this call today to understand where Clean Fuels Ohio has positioned itself in terms of key pillars for collaboration. And so, as I mentioned, we've been around since 2002. So we just celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. So, over the past 20 years, we've really solidified ourselves as not just someone who can help fleet managers transition their vehicles to cleaner running operations and cost-saving operations, but someone who's really focused on community and equity-centered partnerships, as we've been doing with local partners, not just in Central Ohio, but across the state. But also another pillar is rural area and community inclusion and empowerment, as I've cited in some of the projects that we're doing with our university partners in rural areas in Ohio. And then something that honestly we would want to kind of see ourselves strive to accomplish more and take more part in is workforce development in Ohio, and just understanding that whatever project does come out of the CFI program to be awarded in Ohio, we want to be an active partner around that and help leverage some of the partnerships and the agencies and the resources that will promote workforce development, understanding that there are programs that we can kind of pilot and administer and set in place permanently that will not just deploy new infrastructure and new charging technologies, but also kind of teach folks in a vocational setting on how to be more tech savvy, or help even promote ways that we can start teaching folks on how to be electricians, or maybe even become fleet mechanics and maintenance technicians as well. So those are all real conversations and real topic areas that we talk with a lot of the kind of the university programs that focus on all fuel vehicles training as well. So I've listed in bullet points some of the work that we've done to date, but kind of wanted to end with that note on how we can kind of be your lighthouse in this kind of this next wave of funding, and specifically with the CFI program, if there are areas that you need to kind of need more expertise and insight on. So thanks for your time, and I will let Jacob move on to the next slide to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Tim, for that great review of the CFI NOHO. I've seen a lot of questions in chat, and it's great that everybody is getting involved. The Q&A section is actually going to be, I think, right after this one, but we will get to as many of your questions as you can. And I know I've seen a couple that I will answer in my section. So we'll hopefully check a few of those off here in a minute. So the next portion is just reviewing how CFO can help actually develop and develop your project and submit your grant request. So first thing is, generally things like this: webinars, summaries, and sessions and white papers that we can put together to help spread knowledge. As Tim and Christy have both mentioned, we've been around for a little more than 20 years now, have partnered on a number of grants at the state level, at the federal level, even helped lead a couple grants on the multi-state level. One of the grants that we're working on has, I think, members in 14 states. So we've been around for a little while and have a little experience working with this. And we're happy to share that knowledge and those best practices that we've developed. Secondly, is we can help vet projects and proposals and use that experience to identify strengths and weaknesses in your proposals, not just from grants that we've seen, but grants that we've worked on, and make sure that we know what questions the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration are asking, and make sure that they get answered in our proposals that we're working on. We can also help put together an internal strategy for administering the grant when you actually get the funding and reporting your experiences back to the federal government. Because that is for those of us who have worked on the federal grants before, that can be a very complicated process. The federal government tends to be very strict when it comes to reporting. And I think we've put together some very, very good internal strategies for how to make that as painless a procedure as possible. And I say that as somebody who is fairly new to Clean Fuels Ohio, having started in August and having experienced the process elsewhere in the world. So we can, as a Clean Cities Coalition, we've been partnered on a lot of projects throughout the state. We've worked with all kinds of fuel types, all kinds of vendors, and we've helped to develop projects with all of these. So we can really tailor our recommendations on projects and on grant applications to your needs, your goals, and help make sure that that is all as appropriate as possible for not only this grant, but for what your organization and your communities are really looking to do with the funding. We can help with even help with the grant writing. And this is a very broad spectrum offer. It could be as little as, you need another set of eyes, somebody to proofread and make sure that everything that you think is in there is in there. And if you're kind of still developing a project, we can get more involved. We can, help. We have a great internal grant writing team. And we can actually put together the language and make sure that infrastructure and maintenance and future proofing and everything is involved and considered in the proposals that are being put together. We are also able to offer letters of support for alternative fuels projects and proposals. So this is, as a Clean Cities Coalition, in the past, there have been some FHWA and US Department of Transportation proposals where the Clean Cities Coalitions around the country have been specifically named as a kind of preferred partner. I'm not actually sure that was the official term of art, but something like that. And so we are, like, literally, the Clean Cities Coalition was created by the Department of Energy to help support the deployment of alternative fuels. So we have a voice there, and we are happy to lend it to support your programs and your proposals and make sure that applications are as competitive as possible. And finally, we can help you connect with vendors and other potential partners, both in the private sector, but also in the public sector. So if you are, for example, a community library, a county library system who's looking to put in EV charging stations, we can help you connect with private vendors and charging companies to identify the products that would best suit your needs. If you're a vendor or a manufacturer on the other side of that, we're a resource for a lot of communities around the state, and we can help make connections on that end as well. And real quickly, these are just some of our members, some of our platinum and gold tier members, private members. We have a lot of them across all kinds of fuel types and infrastructure types and vehicle scale. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We are happy to help kind of identify some of those opportunities for you. And also, I do want to highlight, outside of what CFO can offer, there are some great tools out there to help structure your grants and develop your proposal, or structure your grant proposals. The first of these, the Alternative Fuel Lifecycle Environmental and Economic Transportation tool, aka the A-Fleet tool, I think is actually required for any proposal that is going in for corridor funding. It is an FHWA project that identifies emissions and a number of environmental factors in alternative fuels deployment, and is something that they have been using for a number of years. So that is, I believe, a required component for any corridor application for corridor funding. The next two are both equity tools developed by the Joint Office and the U.S. Department of Transportation, focusing on equity. The first of these is the Department of Transportation Disadvantaged Census Tract tool, which uses data from a number of sources. I think HUD, Department of Transportation, EPA, FEMA, the census, of course, a number of other sources to identify disadvantaged communities that are, well, one of the Biden administration's priorities for this funding. The other tool is the EV charging and Justice 40 map, which those of us who were involved with NEVI proposals will be very familiar with. It is the same map, but it identifies charging corridors and priority areas for EV charging infrastructure in line with the Biden administration's Justice 40 priorities. On the state level, the Ohio Department of Transportation has put together a number of really fantastic tools. These were all released on a webinar yesterday. Hopefully, most of you were able to attend that. And these are all on the Drive Ohio website. And yes, again, this slide deck will be available after the presentation, so you'll have all of these links. But they have put together a tool for how to develop your grant process. So like actually how to structure it and put together timelines, and it's a fantastic tool. Would very highly recommend you take a look at that. Honestly, not just for transportation focused grants. I think it does a great job just how describing how to approach grants as a whole. The second is their EV chargers guide, which was, I think, developed for the NEVI plan, but is a great resource for, I think, all things EV chargers. The third is the CFI one-pager that they released. I think they did a very good job, but hopefully all of that information will be redundant based on what we've already covered in this webinar. And then finally, ODOT has also offered to write letters of support in support of programs that are based here in Ohio. They've set an internal or a deadline of May 14th for requests for those letters and put together a form on their website that you just need to fill out. And then I've seen a lot more questions come in chat. And again, we will get to the Q&A session here in a little while. But there was actually one that I specifically wanted to answer now. It was regarding how nonprofits can offer to be a part of the grant if we cannot be a primary on it. So that just means that we cannot be the originating agency or body for that grant. We can be a partner, we can offer services, we can be involved on the community engagement or any number of components. We just won't be the primary agency submitting that grant. All right. Moving on to the next section. Lexi, are you ready to take it away?
I think she's having trouble unmuting
Oh.
herself. Jacob. There she is.
Thank you. So sorry, everyone. I'm just gonna, can you also allow me to share my screen, Jacob?
Ah, yes.
Thank you so much. It's really hard to follow Tim and Jacob. They're so knowledgeable about all of this information. And now you guys are stuck with me for a moment. I believe it should take, this will be ready in just a second.
Okay, you should have permission.
So you need to stop sharing your screen so I can start sharing mine. There we go.
Ah.
So sorry, everyone. I promise this will not take long. And I just wanted to ask you all just a few questions on your experience with the webinar. I know there are a lot of really valuable questions. I recently joined Clean Fuels after some time at Share Mobility and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. And I look forward to discussing how our smaller local governments can be involved and apply for this funding. I know their participation and ability to work on these projects is super important. And here at Clean Fuels, we are very passionate about supporting all of the communities in our state and making sure that we're working towards a more sustainable future together. Now, enough from me. Let me go ahead and get started here. We're going to use menti.com to just ask some quick questions today. If you all go to menti.com and type in the code that is going to be at the top of the screen, you'll be able to get to the questions, and then you can also scan the QR code with your phone camera, and we'll dive in. So again, it's at the top of the screen right here, so you can always see that if you are having issues. But I just want to know, was this webinar productive, or do you still have a lot of questions? We didn't get to the Q&A session yet, but we will. And also questions that you do have that we don't get to answering, we are going to send responses out to all of the attendees that have registered. So please keep the questions coming. If you have more, email Tim or Jacob afterwards, and we'll make sure we'll get those answered. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it, but you still have questions. That means we still have a lot to talk about, and I'll discuss some of our other learning opportunities after this. So moving on, we would just want to know, are you ready to start an application with your team or as the champion, as that prime grant leader? So the first, you can select as many as you want here. So you might be confident in the next steps and you know where you're going, or you need help with grant writing, or you need help talking through the concept, or both, or you have found that this is just not a great opportunity for your organization at this point. Maybe you're in the private sector or a nonprofit organization, and you just don't see someone to partner with, or it just doesn't seem feasible for you right now, and that's okay. Otherwise, we'd love to talk through the program with you and see what those opportunities are if you're interested. Great. We're so excited that all of you guys want to learn more, talk through the concepts, find a partnership. That's what we're here for. ODOT did and HNCB did a great job yesterday with their webinar. We want to support you all as well. So moving on, this is the last question. It's just if you guys see the little reactions that you can provide to this webinar, I just want to ask, are you considering joining us for part 2? Part 2 will be a little more informal. It will allow you all to participate in the conversation. And then following that, we will have something that we're calling collaboration hours. And those are going to be specific for our members. So if you're not a member and you're interested in becoming one, reach out to myself. My email is lpetrella@cleanfuelsohio.org. And you also have my colleagues' emails at the end of this presentation. I think, oh, good. I'm so glad a lot of you are considering joining us. I'm going to close out the questions here. And then Jacob, if you could go back to sharing your screen, and we'll quickly get to Q&A. Maybe we can stay on an extra 5 minutes and get a few more questions answered. Otherwise, look forward to that email from all of us. I hope that was quick enough. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Lexi. And the Mentimeter will be up for the rest of this presentation, so feel free to go in and add more responses or put in more feedback through that. All right. And I got it shared correctly on the first try this time. Awesome. Okay. And this is just a quick review of what Lexi mentioned in regards to membership benefits. So we offer really a variety of memberships or benefits for our members, including professional development, organizational development, sponsorship opportunities, educational opportunities, input on policy work and industry and market advocacy, access to our fleet consulting services, and also funding identification. So identifying more opportunities like this and figuring out how your organizations can access those resources. And so last slide, I promised before our Q&A session. Thank you all for attending. If you have any questions about this webinar or about the funding opportunity, feel free to reach out to Tim or I. Our emails are currently up on the slide. We'll happy to answer any questions or dig into more detail on kind of how this might be appropriate for you all of your organizations. Okay, so moving on to Q&A. I am just going to start at the chat. Tim or Lexi, if there are any questions in chat that you kind of specifically noticed, we can start with those. They can't unmute. All right, there we go. Nope.
Can you hear me now, guys? Great. Okay,
Yes, I
so
can hear Tim.
can you hear me, Jacob?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying, what I was asking one of the questions putting out to the group, what if it's a smaller municipality and we don't need the full 500K funding of that specific agreement? That's just a maximum award that the DOT will permit to provide. It's not like you have to reach that upper limit by any means. I think as long as you understand what your project will cost and what that budget you'll anticipate to include for personnel time working on the project, for actual charging infrastructure and hardware, for any of the technical scope of services regarding like pre-site planning or pre-construction planning. Those are all costs to be considered. And if you don't think you'll reach up to that 500,000, it's not like, they'll view your project differently. Like I said earlier, because it's a significant amount of funding by the federal government, they could award as many as 15 to 20 projects, maybe even more, just depending on how expensive each of these projects will look like. So if you are a smaller municipality and don't want to shoot for the stars and only see yourselves maybe applying for that minimum, that's totally fine, as long as it's a project with a reasonable budget and something that you can make for a strong project and bring in good key partners as well.
Great answer, Tim. I think the only other thing I would add to that is there might be an opportunity there to approach some other maybe similar organizations and put together a larger program, or maybe talk to like your regional planning organization and get more organizations involved and put together just a bigger proposal.
Yeah, and another question that I'll put out to the group is, are there rules around what and how costs should be reported? Typically, for Department of Energy projects, they have templates that you can use, such as a budget justification file, an SF424 form, and then also a cost share tab in that budget justification. And so I haven't seen anything yet in terms of resources and templates are under the CFI program, but it's something that I'm going to try to look more into throughout this week and see if there's a standard template or if applicants are required to just kind of use whatever template that they've used in the past. But I don't expect for applicants to do that. There should be some sort of structure with documents that are required to be submitted. There might be some more information on the grants.gov webpage under the specific CFI program and what has to be submitted on that specific portal. So I'll have to double check. But there should be some guidance there on how costs should be reported, specifically the cost share in some sort of like Excel file. So that's something that we'll have to look into and can probably share more insight on over the next week or so, or not, if not by then by the second webinar when we meet up.
Okay, awesome. Next one I see is, if a park or park district requires a paid parking pass, are they an eligible site? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I would say that they are still an eligible site because, while the park systems and the Metro Park systems and whatever kind of amenity you're providing, and you guys have your own kind of structure on entrance fees and just that whole structure that we have no control over, it's still a public park, right? And what you're offering. And so I think there might have to be some clarification on what will then deem it to fall under the community program as opposed to something else. But it should still be considered an eligible site. That's a question that I can pose to maybe the folks at the DOT or on an upcoming webinar, just so that if there's a park that wants to put an application, will that be something that prohibits them from applying for a community program grant? So I think that's a good question. Paid parking, if that prohibits you from being an eligible site.
Yeah, definitely something we would want to confirm. I know that, for example, parking garages would qualify. Even though they are behind a paid gate, it is a gate that kind of any member of the public can get through at any time of day. So yeah, I would definitely want to confirm that.
Yeah, and another question that I think is important for a lot of folks here on the call is, how can you all partner with Clean Fuels Ohio and offer to be part of a grant, and some of the guidance around that. So I think the next step really is just following up with us and kind of reaching out individually and setting up your own call with us. We're more than happy to sit down and kind of hear what services and technology that you guys provide and put out there, and how we can connect you and see what the needs look like from your end, but also some of the potential interest from eligible applicants that we're seeing on our end. So a lot of the times we do start with those conversations at first, and then we do have some grant writing services that we offer with some fees attached, but we also do have membership services that we offer, and that's something that can kind of be intertwined with this whole grant writing process as well. So I know folks like Michael and other folks maybe from the hardware side are curious to see how they can kind of put their name out there. And so certainly there's a way to connect with us first, and then kind of see where we can identify potential partnerships. But that's something that we can follow up on, and we have all of your contact information here saved as well. And if you don't hear from us first, definitely reach out and want to see if you can set up a time to talk with us.
I'll just jump in really fast, Tim. When we send out all the responses to the questions that have been posted in the chat today, I will also include some information on our membership. I see that Sue asked the question, would we be willing to assist our partners in understanding the paperwork and filling it out? That's something that we'll look into as we talk with you. For our members, this is something that we depending on the scope, we consider part of membership. And if you are not a member, we can still work with you to determine if we can help with writing the actual grant for you and helping you with that documentation. So just reach out to us. I'll send information. You guys will have our contact information, and we'll be happy to chat with you whenever it's convenient. Also, I know we're wrapping up here. It's 2:02. I want to remind you all that we are going to have a follow-up conversation and as well as collaboration hours with our members that are interested. There's, there's going to be time to become a member if you're interested in joining us for that. But that's one-on-one conversation with your organization or potentially others that you want to partner on for your grant application. So I know we're at 2:02, so we should probably wrap it up in respect for your time. But thank you all so much for joining us today.
Yep, thank you, everyone. And we have all your questions recorded. So we'll be sure to try to reach out individually to address any questions that weren't answered today in this session. And we'll keep them in mind if we have more time during the next part of this webinar series. So thank you all again. Have a good rest of your afternoon, and we hope to connect with you very soon. So thank you all for attending.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.